All right, so right here we have Texan who currently lives in Seattle, and Kelly is a longtime Agile and DevOps enthusiast, and he's going to tell us about a story, a European adventure he recently had with DevOps. So please join me in welcoming Kelly.
Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Kelly Looney. Long time in software, almost 30 years, doing all kinds of different software. And I've been really lucky in my career. I've had a chance to work with some great people. Was part of the early small talk community, which kind of naturally led to becoming an Agile sort of person. If you look at probably about half the people that signed the Agile Manifesto originally came from that kind of small talk community, because this sort of style of development of kind of growing software and incrementally building things, really that's one of the things that came out of that community. So I was lucky I had a chance to work with people like Kent Beck early in his career. Some of the people, Martin Fowler, some of the people that really kind of started Agile all the way around, and have been spent a lot of years in companies doing Agile type development, and then also helping big organizations make that sort of a transformation. I'm going to tell a story today about experience I had over the last few years. I had a friend of mine call me up and say, hey, I've got a big company that needs help. They want to go through an Agile transformation. They're curious about DevOps as well, and I know you're interested in that. Another thing I didn't mention is I worked at ThoughtWorks for a while, and the guy from the chef video earlier that kind of had his face half with the book, and that's Jez Humble. And he's somebody that I worked with at ThoughtWorks when he was just publishing the book Continuous Delivery, and I got really enthused about early customers doing this sort of thing. I'm convinced it's the future of software development, that releases are going away. And we're just going to constantly stream new software in development kind of as we go. And so I had this friend of mine call me up and say, yeah, I've got a company that needs help. They're based in Gibraltar, but most of the work is going to be in Vienna, Austria. And my reaction to it was, where do I sign? Let me go try this out. Partly because, interesting problem, cool place to see and explore. But also one of the things that fascinates me is, we talk in the DevOps world all the time about culture. But what about when actual culture, like national culture, also starts to fit into the mix? And that's another thing, global development and people from different parts of the world understanding one another is something that sort of fascinates me. So I'm real interested in things like that. So let me just tell you a little bit about the company. The company's called bwin Party that I worked for a while. I started out as a consultant for them and joined a little bit later as a full-time employee. They kind of brought me in to be their main DevOps evangelist, a person to help bring DevOps into their organization. Real money gaming is the term that they use. A simpler way to understand that is gambling. Real money gaming, actually sports betting is a huge industry, especially for Europe and for much of the world. We don't think of it as much here in the US. There's a lot of it that goes on here in the US, but most of it isn't legal. In Europe, it is legal, but what's interesting about it is, you've got different laws for every country as far as how you might have to deal with it. And this company, bwin Party, they kind of made their stake trying to do this business in a legal way. And as I'll explain in a little bit, that's not easy. It's not easy to follow all the rules to make this actually work. But good-sized company, 600 million, at one point had been over $1 billion company. So in an industry that was shrinking a little bit, but online sports betting, which is huge, if you go to Europe, you turn on the TV, I'd say it seems like half the commercials in a lot of countries are about online betting, online gambling for sports types of things. Company has an awkward name, bwin Party. It's because they're the merger of two organizations. One was bwin, Bet to Win, and the other one was a company called Party Gaming, which was an online poker, online casino kind of a company. And this merger, I guess, made great sense from a standpoint of finances. It was two of the leaders in the industry coming together. But from a technology standpoint, as many mergers are, as many of you all may know, it was kind of a disaster. It was two completely different stacks. You had a fairly nice Windows, C#, .NET, SQL Server stack of applications on the bWin side, and then a Linux, Oracle, Java overall setup on the party gaming side. So they ended up building one system that was a combination of these two completely different technology stacks. Data centers in different parts of the world, there was probably about 30 total data centers, but the main ones were in Gibraltar, which, in case any of you guys or any of you all have thought about starting a company and basing it in Gibraltar, it's the worst place to put a data center you can possibly imagine. The internet connectivity there sucks, and the reason that you do start a business there is for tax reasons. Okay, and that's in this industry, much of it is based in that area. And I think they had an outage last year in which the local utility went down and half the online gambling industry all came down at the same time, and everybody got to test their disaster recovery process when all the kind of data centers went down there. Also a big data center in Vienna where I was based, and about 2,000 servers in production, 200 people in the company just doing ops and infrastructure. It was a situation of a big system making a lot of money. There were billions of euros being bet every day with this system, and it had to stay up, but it was kind of a rickety contraption, and so they need a lot of ops people. And I used to joke that it felt to me as if in production that they were rebooting servers like they were playing a piano, you know, kind of to keep everything up and running however they could. About 700 developers in a variety of different development locations, places like Vienna, Hyderabad, India, Sofia, Bulgaria, in Ukraine. We chose, development in an active war zone. You know, we had all kinds of fun things to deal with that maybe you don't see as much in the U.S. When I came in, I joined the company in 2013. As I said before, first as to help with Agile, but I in looking at the overall situation, I kind of characterized the product as the multi-headed monster. The issue was it was one gigantic monolithic application that was, as I mentioned before, it was these two different technology stacks combined together. And the way the product worked, there was probably 30 different countries around the world where the companies had a website or a web presence legally for you to do betting and so on. And in each one of those different countries around the world, there were different rules, different laws that had to be adhered to. And so this one application had a different face in every one of those different countries and a different set of rules under which that it had to subscribe to. So very complicated thing to have to keep up and running. The other thing that I noticed as I came in, there were completely separate ops, maintenance, and development teams. In India, it went so far it was almost like a caste system. It really was. It was amazing to me. It was like there were three castes. The managers were at the top, and they were the most important people. Then there were the developers who were writing new code. They were the next level. And then for some reason, the poor bastards at the bottom level were the people that had to fix all the things that were broken and what the developers that wrote new code had to do. So all the maintenance work was the lowest level and the least the least desirable place to be kind of in the organization. So it caused all kinds of problems. All the best developers were writing the new code. It was only junior developers that were doing the hard work of figuring out what was wrong and fixing things. So caused all kinds of problems. The other thing that I noticed was that the whole organization, they were organized around their own code base and their own technologies. There was a Windows group, and there was a Linux group, and there was a database group, and there was and then different kinds of other caching technology, every other kinds of technology. There were different organizations based on those things. And in order to get something done and actually deliver it to a customer, you had to do a project. But the way the projects worked, I love one of the executives had a term for the project managers there. He called them toothless tigers. Because their role was to run around the organization and pester all these silos to try to get whatever their project was done. And the problem is you get into an organization, if you build enough gates, you get to a place where almost nothing can get done. If you have all these different places that can say no, that cannot let something get done, and you give them that power to stop things, pretty soon you're just frozen. You just freeze up. And this was a problem the organization was having. The company had been around long enough. I like to term the technology as sort of turn-of-the-century technology. A lot of their systems were designed really pre-year 2000, and we're kind of in the era of, you start your application by designing a big relational database. And then you put some UI code, and then you kind of build from there. And they built a lot of their business logic into stored procedures and other semi-unmaintainable things. I've had great success in places using things like stored procedures, but I tend to use them for optimizing performance of various things rather than the main place to put business rules. And then the other part of it is the organization had mostly done sort of in-house build and deploy and monitoring tools. They'd kind of done all their own stuff because they were from an era where there weren't a lot of options for those things, and so they built their own, kind of in what they did. As I mentioned before, millions of euros wagered every day, different faces and rules for different markets. And then the most interesting part of it for me was you had the clashing cultures. And we certainly had the clashing cultures that we are used to in the DevOps world of an ops team who felt responsible for running the product, responsible for keeping uptime and so on, versus a dev team struggling to try to get new things into production. So there was that culture clash. But the other thing we had, as I mentioned before, is we had actual national cultures at play. And what was kind of interesting to me was, so you had a big development center in Austria, in Vienna, where I was based, and then another place where I went a lot, which is in Hyderabad in India. And it turns out, I didn't realize this when I joined the company, but that Austrians and Indians trying to work together is a uniquely bad cultural match. They're really funny. It's like a bunch of over-optimists trying to deal with a bunch of over-pessimists. And they absolutely can't communicate with one. They're all trying to do the right things. They're all smart, but they can't communicate with one another because they have such different points of view. The thing that was ironic is that both those two cultures loved authority. They both really liked authority. They liked somebody a smart person to tell everybody else what to do. And so this American coming into play with sort of screw the man, I don't like authority, do it on your own. That just added more chaos to the mix at first. So it was a real challenge to try to get these things dealt with. So that's what the problem looked like. I'll show one other view of it. One of the early products that we decided to pull in to help us was an application monitoring tool, was AppDynamics. And here's the first view of the overall system in production that we pulled out of AppDynamics once we got all the agents and everything deployed. So just a big, incomprehensible mess, really. It's what a lot of it was. So there's the problem. What did we do about it? Well, the good news was the company was generating a lot of money, had money to deal with things, and so we got good help. We did a global agile transformation. That's how I became a part of the organization originally. And we got people like Craig Lerman over on the left, the sort of doofus doing this thing, and Damon Edwards of DTO and DevOps fame came in to help us. Luke Holman came in to do a bunch of seminars with us as well. We did a lot of Scrum training, kind of a lot of the 96 Scrum teams we were dealing with overall in the organization on one product. You know, a lot of times you'll hear, oh, we got a lot of Scrum teams, but everybody's doing a different product. Well, that's a great advantage. But when you're all trying to do kind of one big product, this makes the aspect of scaling Agile kind of a really big deal. And so we use both Craig Larman's approach towards scaling Agile. Now the organization is looking a lot at the Scaled Agile framework as well. We also went through several kind of organizational changes, and I'll talk about, you know, kind of why that was so important. We went from everything being about components to being more about features. We kind of evolved to feature teams. And then after that, we actually turned into more of a different teams providing different services and kind of looked at the overall product as an amalgamation of a bunch of different services. We also went from an ops approach until we chose this progressive name, Lean Ops, for our new ops organization that we put together. After a while, though, I looked at that and I thought, and it kind of dawned on me that, okay, this Lean Ops organization is apparently the organization that is keeping us from doing actual DevOps. And so we ended up transitioning again to real delivery units doing more a true DevOps, and sort of made the kind of horizontal aspect of operations as small as we could. Some of the cultural changes that we had to kind of put in place and we had to kind of think about there, this place was kind of an extreme example for me of something that I've seen in corporations all over the US and all over different parts of the world. We've gotten into this mode in a lot of places in which, you know, and leadership is the problem. Leadership signals is where this comes from, but everybody in the organization thinks that they need to be a deep level expert in something. You know, it's the best way to protect your job, it's the best thing to do. And so everybody focuses on being the expert in one thing, in one technology, one library, one set of things. And you know, the only way you really get respect within the organization is if you're a deep expert. Now, deep expertise is obviously very important, and you should respect deep expertise, but it's kind of crazy when every single person in the organization is a deep expert in something different. What you've done is create an organization of bottlenecks when you kind of do that. It's like, oh, there's only one person to go to for that, or so on. So what we really started to talk about was the idea of valuing developers. You know, you need deep experts, but you also need people that can do a lot of different things, that are utility players. Maybe they have deep expertise in one area, but they're willing to do anything that's valuable to the company, that's valuable to their project and what's going on. And sort of sending the signals out that that was of high value was really important to try to get things to change. And to show that the people that were willing to step outside of their normal bounds. I mean, this was really a big issue, especially for me in Europe, with people wanting to only stay inside their box and only do the one thing that they knew the most about. And you know, and I remember sitting in a meeting one time. We had a really, really competent, a really good SQL Server group that did a great job of maintaining their database and was always on top of all the work that they had to do. They really were good. But the comment that I made was, what difference does it make if we have a great database if the rest of the product is burning? You know, and people in the organization kind of had that sort of attitude of, well, you know, I can just make my part work. And I'm not going to, you know, the rest of this stuff I can't be responsible for. And what you've really got to do is get into the organization the idea that people want to do the whole thing and be responsible for the whole thing. And you can't just do that at the bottom level, because management has to be okay with it. They have to be behind that too. And so this was a thing where we had to say and do different things at the lower level of the organization, and also get the message across to management of how they needed to communicate and what they needed to do as well. So, you know, there's all this stuff about how, you know, we want full stack developers. We want developers that understand what we're trying to do, understand the requirements, how to test. They can, write, build, integrate. Oh my gosh, we need developers to do all these things. And so you get this common refrain of, oh, this is crazy. Everybody can't know everything. You got to have deep experts. And my point is that, or the point that I get across is, yes, I understand that. The issue is that we've swung the needle too far towards all deep experts. We need the experts to be helping the other parts of the organization when they need that expertise. But most of the problems you don't need a deep expert for. A cursory knowledge in a technology is enough to get by in a lot of the things that you want to do, and people that are willing to pick that up and do the work are valuable. So let's talk about, oh my God, you want developers to do everything. Is that really possible? Well, first of all, if you have the right attitude of, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to figure this out, that's, I think, 80% of the problem. But the other part of it is that today's tools and processes, when you look at a lot of the tools out there for developers nowadays, what they're about is bringing more decision making to the level of a developer. It's about allowing developers to, automating a lot of things that they had to do before and allowing them to understand more of the big picture. Things like, certainly Agile gives you access to your customer. That's the point of Agile, is to put the customer on your team or a representative of the customer so that you have access to what they really need on a fairly constant basis. Things like distributed version control, things like Git and Mercurial give you all the ability to branch and to collaborate on your own that other organizations don't have. Continuous integration, a funny thing about things like Jenkins, and I love Jenkins, I love the continuous integration tools, but they're fairly simple. They're not Jenkins is as complicated as all the plugins you put into it. Jenkins by itself is fairly simple. And the thing about a continuous integration tool is not what it does, it's what it does between the ears of developers. It gets developers thinking in terms of, I don't want to check in code that's going to break the build, it's going to break other people's stuff. It gets developers thinking about writing code that fits within the overall structure of an application. That's the point of continuous integration, and it lets you, instead of having this big process at the end of development where all the smartest people have to get together and figure out how to make everything work together, it lets all the developers be a part of integrating what's there. So I guess the main point I'd say is all these tools give you the ability of doing much, much more. The delivery pipelines using Vagrant, Puppet, Chef, SaltStack, things like that, to make your infrastructure and your deployment automatic, make those programs that you can run as well, mean that you don't need all these other people anymore. You can run this and make all these other departments, you can make these things happen on your own. And then monitoring lets you see and assess everything that's going on. So there's great tools out there to help people, and developers have the luxury of being able to get a better understanding of what it is they're really trying to build. Some of the sorts of things that we pulled in, we did convert over from Subversion to Git to give people more ability to share code, more ability to collaborate. We changed our in-house deploy into a Jenkins we used Puppet and Chef and Rundeck. We started out with a lot of systems that were bare metal. We went to VMware and then started the process of moving towards Docker and containers. So I'll talk about that a little bit. One of the biggest things, and I'll talk about this some more, is using modern monitoring. The App Dynamics of the world, the New Relics of the world make a tremendous amount of difference. So this is some of the different things that we worked with. I'll just talk quickly about with containers. We got a lot of buy-in on containers with the idea that we can save money on VMware because it's a cheaper way to do virtualization. But the reality is the biggest thing about containers was the separation of concerns between developers and infrastructure. developers could now have control of what libraries, what the environment was around their own code, rather than having to conform to whatever some other infrastructure group needed to have that maybe didn't really relate well to what they were trying to do. So Docker and containers give developers more power to control their own environment. And I think that's a bigger part of the whole process. So I've got a little bit more material here than I've got time for. Let me jump ahead real quickly to one thing that I wanted to talk about as well. You know, basically what DevOps and CD mean for the organization is that, you know, the whole idea of holding off changes to retain stability, and we had this in a huge way at BWin Party. There was the ops group actively would push off, would try to hold back and not have changes in order to stay stable. This whole idea of doing that gets turned on its head, because the idea is to constantly change production with very, very small changes. And the advantage of the small changes are that they are, it's easy to fix something if it goes wrong, if something goes wrong with it. You don't need a bunch of experts to help you figure out what's necessary in order to debug something in that sort of case. The other point that I'll make, and it kind of goes to the company where I work now in Seattle, is that environments start to proliferate as you do more with continuous delivery. You need more environments for more different development teams to be able to work separately. And this was a thing that was a huge problem for us, in that we had a giant QA lab, and all our teams were queued up behind it. You know, they spread out to do development, and then queued up behind their QA labs to try to get work done, which were constantly being reconfigured. And so having the ability to give each team their own environment in which to work, kind of like what we did with Docker and containers, but be able to do that for any kind of system with VMs is a huge benefit. And that's one of the things that my company, SkyTap, does, is we do cloud dev test environments. And this is something that I saw was a huge issue for us at BWin Party. How are we doing? Am I over on time? Okay, all right. A little bit more to kind of talk about here. Let me just mention one other thing. We, basically in coming in, we did, you know, the kind of the steps we took to kind of try to make the overall system better was I hosted a couple of different workshops. We got people together from all over the organization. What we wanted to look at is, okay, ask the people actually involved with the system, what are the things that we can do that will make the biggest difference in what's going on? And the number one issue we got back, and once again, we're talking about this system that was two different stacks, and essentially a lot of what we would see is that if you were looking at a problem, trying to do a root cause analysis or so on for an outage, you'd look in one part of the system, and then it would go off into the other. It would go off from the .NET part into the Java part, and then people would just throw up their hands and say, no, that's a black hole. I don't understand that stuff at all. So the issue was really understanding your own system. And this is what monitoring made a really big difference for us. I would say that App Dynamics, and once again, there's other tools that do similar sorts of things. Both App Dynamics and New Relic come from the same sort of general kind of concept. It's sort of if you've got a large system that doesn't have all the logging code that needs to have in there, they automatically inject it for you at runtime so that you can get the logging even for systems that weren't built to be well logged. What it gave for us was like a giant debugger that allowed us to look through our whole system and kind of understand what was going on in all the different parts of the system, even where different groups weren't very familiar with the code at all. And it allowed us to pinpoint the things that we needed to improve and the things we needed to make better. So just the final thing to mention, so I talked about before, this talks about how continuous delivery tends to work, where you break development up into different pieces and into these different delivery pipelines. Ideally, each one of these steps in the pipeline is a place where you want to have your own environment for people to be able to test. And one of the other issues I see is that people feel like, okay, every environment I have needs to be a replica of production. And that's really expensive. Even to have a test replica of production that maybe doesn't have all the load balancing and everything, that still can be very expensive. So not only do you need test environments that are close to production, but you also need a different levels of test environment. You need early test environments just to test the basics, and then you need more complicated ones as you go. And so one of the things that I look at in doing a DevOps transformation is kind of an overall look at what are the environments that you need and how do you need to build them. And this is one of the things that I spent a lot of time with customers doing today. I think I'm pretty much done on time, so thanks very much.